Hello and welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about life through the prism of food. And this week we're with Irish chef Anna Haugh.
And I remember they used to just stare at me for like just a couple of seconds, confused, because I'd only just walked in the door. But my mother had given me these kind of ground rules of, sure, why would you pay for that? That's not fresh.
Anna is part of the massive story of British food culture. She left Dublin as a young woman to cook in the steamiest kitchens in London. Shane Osborn's Terre, Philip Howard's The Square and Gordon Ramsay's London House. But in 2019 she opened her own, Myrtle, in Chelsea. More than a nod, a deep bow to Myrtle Allen, the doyenne of Irish cuisine and the inspiration behind Darina Allen's Ballymaloe Cookery School. Myrtle is all about a journey through Irish food, but Cooking with Anna, her first cookbook, is all about home. I asked her why she chose to make it personal.
Yeah, so I wanted to write a cookbook for a very long time. So when everybody else in the lockdown seemed to have a great idea of doing a cookbook, I was just like, oh God, if there was just something I could do to keep myself busy, it would be so brilliant. And it never dawned on me to do a cookbook. But I'm never motivated by money. I'm not motivated, I think, by things that might sound good or even make me look good. I am motivated by being useful. So I came up with the idea of the cookbook from an accidental conversation with my sister. We like to plan Christmas from the summer. And I said to Sarah, so what are you cooking on Christmas Day? And she said, well, I'm going to obviously start off with, some canapes, some bits and pieces, champagne, and then we'll move on to Christmas Day soup. I was like, shut up. I was like, what's Christmas Day soup? And she was like, no, you shut up, Anna. You know exactly what Christmas Day soup is. And I was going through like childhood memories, and I was like, I don't recall a Christmas Day soup. And she was like, you made it. You made it in our house on Christmas Day, and then you gave me the recipe, and then since then, the girls, she's got 3 daughters, always say, you have to do Christmas Day soup, Mammy, or it's not Christmas Day. And I was like, that's amazing. What was the soup? And then it's caramelised swede, or we'd call it turnip in Ireland, or did when I was a kid. So then I thought, oh gosh, I've given out recipes to so many people, and it's just kind of, those recipes have become part of people's repertoire. And I thought if I asked for a few of them back as the kind of concept or the backbone of it, and then really shared recipes that I think that it's not just about it sounding good or looking good, but actually could be a useful cookbook. And from that, I found real motivation to write the cookbook.
It's like a real old-fashioned style of cookbook in that you want people to scribble all over it. You want people to add their bits. You want people to splatter it, and you want it to be passed on. And that then becomes a really personal cookbook, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I really encourage people to scribble on their cookbooks. Sometimes you think you'll remember, you won't. So if you add something extra or remove something, write it down, because the cookbook, when you get it, is mine, but it's what you do with the cookbook that it becomes yours. And essentially people are creating their family recipes, their traditional recipes, and it is kind of leaving your mark on those recipes that make it more special.
It is what a recipe is for, isn't it? A recipe is meant to travel. It never really starts anywhere. I mean, whoever came up with an original recipe? It's always a riff on something. I did Anna Jones's fantastic lemon chili cheddar tart. It was fantastic, but I did have those mushrooms in the fridge, and I just thought, I need to put those mushrooms on it. Heaven. I have no idea what Anna Jones's original tasted like. I don't care. Those mushrooms were going to be on that tart right from the moment I saw them there. That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about understanding what a recipe really is. You throw me something, I'll catch it and I'll take it on.
100%. And I really think recipes very often, they're guidelines. They're like, there's borders and certain rules that help you kind of execute it. But it's your own interest, passions, and kind of resources that result in the recipe being yours. So when you travel through the world, there is a version of frittata in probably every culture that had eggs, plentiful. There's a stew in every single culture. There's nowhere in the world that doesn't have a version of a stew. And we feel very, we own our culture and we own our cuisines. But actually, when you open up a few cookbooks, you can relate to lots of different cuisines. And it really is about what's on your doorstep, what ingredients you have, and then trying to do something a little bit different or that sparks an interest in you to result in deliciousness.
Yes, but every book has to have a signature, and you are all about Irish produce. So I do want to talk about that, and I do want to talk a little bit about the mark of Ireland on modern British cuisine, and you are very, very much a part of that whole story of what happens. But let's start with the produce, because that's where your signature is all over this book. It is about the rich dairy produce, particularly of Ireland. You're very much part of the Irish Food Board. You're very much about promoting quality Irish produce. You come from that lovely rich tradition. Last time we met actually was at a dinner with Darina Allen in London, and it was to celebrate Irish produce there. Just give us an idea of that glorious produce that you grew up with, that you learned to cook with.
Yeah, so when I was younger, supermarkets were very different. I'm 43 years old at the moment, and when I was a kid, I would shop with my mother. And my mother came from Dublin Mountains, Glencullen, Barnacullia. So she knew what it was, I guess, to be hungry is a polite way of saying it. So when we would shop, my mother would teach us how to look for the freshest, the best ingredients. She was very particular when it came down to mince, that she would get me, and I used to hate it, but I'd go to the butcher and I'd have to look at a piece of meat and ask him to mince that piece of meat. I didn't want the mince. And that's really about my mother teaching me about marbling, about the colour of the meat. And that's really about looking for quality. So it's not just about something being Irish, but it's actually about the best quality Irish is important. So, eating the right butter, eating good cheeses. We don't talk enough about the difference between pasteurised and unpasteurised cheeses. It's a very expensive decision to do unpasteurised cheeses, but in that comes delight. In that comes magic, in that comes flavour, and huge skill is needed to execute this. And that is really the backbone of what most people know, first of all, about Irish is our cheeses. We have amazing cheeses. And then it comes to our beef is very well known, and that's about having the right landscape for cattle to thrive in, so that they've got healthy, balanced lives and that they're nourished. And then in the nourishment comes delicious food. And it's not just that, it's about good husbandry. It's about farmers that have been, raised by other farmers, that they take great pride in what they do, so that they protect the history and the kind of livelihood of their future generations. And it's not a simple thing to sum up, but if I was to sum it up, it's about passion. When I meet good farmers, and it could be anything, could be potatoes, could be beef, could be anything, but they're so passionate about what they do that people would be like, really? They're passionate about growing onions, or they're passionate about, growing potatoes. And it's like, yes, and we have to protect those people, because they are protecting our food chain, and they are taking care of the grounds, and they are not using damaging chemicals and, bad ingredients into the animals. That these people have got to be celebrated, and that I think is very important. And I could go on and on about this, about our Fisher people. These people are vital for kind of spreading wonderful food, to us.
It is. And as far as I'm concerned, you could go on all day about that, because I think it is so important. It's about life, isn't it? It's about people. It's about animals exhibiting their natural characteristics. It's about life in the soil. It's about nature. It's about connection, and it's about real people doing stuff that they love, getting their hands dirty. It is anti-industry, it's anti-factory, it's about putting life back on your plate.
And Gilly, I honestly, I totally think you've hit the nail on the head. It is all about connection. And what's happened now, you can't blame anybody in particular, but we are disconnected on where our food comes from. And it's very difficult to reconnect because of our location and our options. So when you go into the supermarket, you just have to trust that the supermarket does the right thing. And really, you're disconnected from the farmer. And as a restaurateur, I put such a huge effort to be connected with the producers. So I call them personally. I try to not have a middle person, in between, so that I know that that person I'm getting the produce from sees me as a human. I'm not just a number. I'm not just somebody who helps them pay the bills. I'm somebody who celebrates what they do and makes them feel proud of what they do. And we need each other. I need them to care. They need me to care. And as a result, the customers get the best version of what Ireland has to offer.
I was thinking this morning, as I was wondering what kind of main themes I wanted to bring out with you, about the relationship between poverty and great food culture. And I was thinking about Italy and Spain and a lot of not so much France, but, the places that have actually suffered from poverty and how much they appreciate food and how creative they are, as you were saying that your mum was, with what little you've got and seeking out the quality from it. Cucina Povera is obviously the best example of that. And Ireland has a history of famine and poverty and hardship. And it also has our understanding of where its culinary culture has really added to the rest of the UK. How aware are the Irish people about that? Because you do say when you were young, you were looking at the rest of the UK thinking, having some kind of imposter syndrome. I can't go to London and be a chef there. How could I ever contribute anything? I mean, what's the feeling amongst Irish people about the richness of their food culture?
I think we could do a podcast on this alone. So very often wealthy countries like Italy had poor corners of their country, but any kind of place that had the famous time in the sun, they had money. And with the money, then it fueled protection of historical recipes and historical food production. Ireland, we only had real poverty. And part of our history was that, we were controlled by the British Empire, and as a result our language was removed, and different kind of, there's a really sad part of history that we can't ignore, but it kind of created this idea that Irish food was bad, and if you wanted to be sophisticated you cooked another cuisine. So it's a kind of challenge that we're embarking on as chefs, to kind of remind the Irish people of the great things they have, and also very often the everyday things they have are quite good. So I did a pop-up in Dublin, and the everyday produce, the beetroots, the carrots, the onions, I had to change the recipes because the flavours were so incredible. And there is this feeling when I sometimes speak to Irish people and I talk about doing fine dining Irish food, they're a bit sceptical. They're like what? Like what? We're not fine dining. We're not fancy. We do peasant food. We don't have this, romantic history of food. We have a sad history of food, of survival, like you mentioned. So it's a tricky subject to embark on, because you have to bring up things that mightn't necessarily be comfortable, but it is in the discomfort where real kind of creativity belongs, and also, a history survives. So I feel like it's a new wave of food now in Ireland, but it is time to kind of look back and see what was great and what could be even greater.
I love that. I talk a lot about the discomfort zone. I think that being uncomfortable is a great place because you have to jump out of it. It's where creativity really comes from. What a great thing. Let's put that in the context of where you come from and the role that you played in the kind of the creation of modern food culture in Britain. You sort of came to London in the 1990s, to late 1990s, the 2000s. You were working with some of the greatest players in modern British food. Shane Osborn at Terre, Philip Howard at the Square, Gordon Ramsay. This was a time when British food was all about Britpop and excitement and, really changing the story of Britain. How did you feel being part of that, having come from that, very different kind of food culture in Ireland?
Well, I left Ireland thinking it was all about modern European cuisine, or even French cuisine was probably the thing I was most passionate about. I didn't know that my future would lie about kind of going back in time and looking for the stories of Ireland. When I was a young chef and I first moved to London, I just craved knowledge. I just craved to understand. It wasn't just about making something beautiful or just making something delicious. I wanted to do it with intention. I didn't want it to be a fluke or an accident. I wanted to know, why is this delicious? And I worked in really ambitious, challenging restaurants because that was the best way for me to train. And back then, the kind of food landscape or the food scene was completely different than what it was now. Like, a lot of the restaurants were similar. Where now this kind of explosion of exciting ideas and exciting people creating their food that they passionately believe in. It's a wonderful time where, I think London was ready for an Irish restaurant when I opened it up. I didn't know it. So in the discomfort, in the nervousness, I pushed on through because that's where growth happens. Nothing should be too easy. Don't get me wrong, you shouldn't be always craving the hardest life. But, if something is too easy, then you're not pushing yourself enough. So when I chose to open up the restaurant, I was just hoping that maybe a few people would be curious. And it was very quickly that I learned that the more information I could give people about Ireland, the happier they'd be. Like, really, when I opened up the restaurant, I was trying to do delicious modern Irish food. And what I learned was that as people come into the restaurant and we try to give this real warm Irish kind of service, like modern Irish hospitality, which is in a way that it's got all the discipline of fine dining, but the warmth of Ireland. And I could tell that what the customer really wanted was connection, like what we were saying earlier on. They want to connect with Ireland. They want to connect with integrity and the sincerity of what we're trying to do. So it sounds easy, but it's quite difficult.
It kind of makes me tear up, actually. God, I mean, we've lost our way so badly, haven't we? The fact that you're kind of putting connection on a plate when it should be absolutely a warm hug everywhere we go. I'm so going to Myrtle. Let's go back to your mother. You say really interestingly, before we go into your full food moments, that actually it is your mother's stocks and jams, roast potatoes and real food cooked from scratch that is at the heart of everything you do. So, you have brought Irish food to London. Myrtle is a refined cuisine with a great big warm hug, but it is basically about those skills that your mother taught you, and stocks and jams are probably about the most important things that anybody could ever teach you, aren't they?
100%. My mother was my first head chef. She was very strict. No wonder I did very well in those demanding kitchens. But what she instilled in all of us was this approach that we didn't waste food. But we didn't avoid wasting food because I was afraid of my mother. We were taught that it would be silly or it would be wrong to be flippant about what we had. We grew lots of fruit in the garden, so gooseberries, blackcurrants, cooking apples, eating apples and pears. And so when you grow something yourself, you don't waste it. But when you're young, you're also, not always appreciative of the things that your parents do for you and teach you, and you see it as a heartache. So for me to get my pocket money, I had to pick the fruit and then top and tail the fruit and do all, so my mother could make the jam. And my friends joke about how they had to work for me to get my pocket money because there'd be so much work for me to do. But the life skills that gives you, so in the kind of pain and in the difficulty is real growth. And so by the time I was a commis chef or an apprentice chef, you're often put in charge of checking off the veg and not the meat, but you check off the veg. So something would come in and I'd see it wasn't fresh. I would go up to the senior chef and I would point out this and this so that they would get a refund or call up the supplier. And I remember they used to just stare at me for like just a couple of seconds, confused, because I'd only just walked in the door. But my mother had given me these kind of ground rules of, sure, why would you pay for that? That's not fresh. And I feel that if she hadn't have done that, my journey would have still been amazing. But it's hard to give somebody the instincts of the right things to do. That takes years. I've brilliant chefs who work for me, but teaching them the things that my mother taught me, takes time, takes money. So I'm very grateful of my mother, even though as a child I would have been not grateful. I didn't want to eat her brown jam, which was so delicious and luscious and incredible. The gooseberry jam, it's not complicated. It's just about getting nice berries and just, spending the time to cook it down. But we grew the gooseberries out our back garden. I give my left arm for a jar of that jam now. But, as a kid, I wanted the pink stuff that was, I remember saying to my mum about how cheap it was. Why won't you buy it for me? Like it was 16p or something. And she was just like, it's muck. That's no good, Anna. And I'd be like, oh, you're just too scatty. You know, like as a child, you're like giving out. But, you know, she was spot on. Like she was dead right.
Tell me about being a mother yourself, and your first food moment is your stepson Henry's goujons. But presumably you're starting to feed Urshan, your baby, this kind of food now. How do you do these goujons that is kind of teaching them that great food matters?
So Henry would have been about, let's say, 11ish when I would have first met him. And children around that age, they like chicken nuggets. And I want to give him the food he wants to eat, but it was important to me that I cooked for him. That's something I like. That's how I give. It's how I show love. So I thought, how can I make this interesting for him so that he would cook with me? So we created a secret recipe, which is not so secret because it's obviously in the cookbook. And he's older now. It doesn't have to be as kind of novelty, but I put Worcestershire sauce in the batter. Now, I don't put eggs in it. So it means that the goujons go crispier because I just use flour, water and Worcestershire sauce. So when I first made it for him, it was just out of love and out of trying to do something which I thought was better than just giving him bought-in chicken nuggets from the freezer. And then, I've made them since for Oisin. And there's something, I didn't realise it when I made that recipe, that it was my first recipe to create that was 100% mine. And the intention was to share with my stepson, but I've made it for Oisin, and I hope, please God, if I'm lucky enough, but one day I'll make them for grandkids, and that's really simple. Like I don't think cooking has to be very complicated, but you have to feel like you own the recipe, you love the recipe, and you're giving it to the people you care about.
Yeah. Pass it on. Your second food moment is Rich's regime. Now, this is about your husband, your partner, the man who makes everything possible. I mean, I hate talking to women about how on earth do you do it, but how on earth do you do it?
Well, you know, I don't want to start crying now. It's really hard. I'm not going to say it's super easy. And there's lots of times where I just think I'm doing it wrong, like all the time. But I really think my sister Sarah was very good when I was expecting Oisin. She said, ask for help. It's not fair and it's not ideal. It's kind of like you aren't supposed to do everything. You're sharing these roles. And Rich is great. He's a hands-on father. And you know, as a partner, you should have somebody that you help, they help you. Like it's supposed to go back and forth. And then sometimes you help more, and then other times they help more. It's not fair all the time, but as long as both of you are trying to be fair, at least it's healthy. But it is really difficult. And the Rich's regime is a couscous recipe which has lots of kind of seeds and loads of vegetables. And I put chicken in it, but you don't have to put chicken in it. It's just a really satisfying Moorish couscous salad, eaten hot or cold. It's delicious. So I make that recipe all the time. I made it last week and batch froze it because while I'm away filming, I'm filming in Ireland on and off quite a bit over the next few months. And that's what he asked for, like, will you make that for me? And it's so simple, but it's got loads of vegetables in it. It's got loads of flavour in it so that when you eat it, you feel really, really satisfied. And that's where I think good, healthy living lies. Like, it's not about things being low fat. It's not about things, you know, counting every single calorie. It's about, I'm going to have a meal. It's going to be nutritious and it's going to satisfy me. And then you're less likely to pick. You're less likely to kind of search out satisfaction somewhere else. Oh, it's okay, I'll have a biscuit afterwards after having everything low fat and lean and all the rest. No, and that's what the couscous was created, because he was competing with his friends, as Rich loves. They're so competitive.
Your third food moment is about your mum. When you were younger, your mother used to encourage your fascination with flavours. You showed real early promise as somebody who really, really was interested in cooking. So she would take you to the supermarket to find different things like juniper berries. And this third food moment is your duck and potato waffle with juniper berries. Tell us about this one.
So actually, you asking me that, I feel a little bit emotional. So this would have been, I would have been quite old doing this. So it would be my mother, I guess, holding on to the last chick in the nest, you know, trying to extend the time together and thinking about what my daughter likes. So yeah, we would pick a recipe maybe from a magazine. And one of them was Savoy cabbage, I remember, with juniper marinated duck breasts. And I remember going out and buying duck. We didn't buy duck. That wasn't a usual thing. And looking for the duck and then marinating it. And then I cooked for her. And we had to get red currants, jelly and stuff. And And I remember my mother eating, and, you know, she'd love it because I made it with love and she was so proud of me. But that memory is, decades and decades ago. And I feel so lucky that I'm now speaking to you and I'm talking about something that my mother was just trying to share with her daughter. And very often I don't think you realise as a parent that those little kind things you're doing are essentially setting up the most beautiful memories for your children. You forget the arguments, you forget the bad stuff, but you do remember those lovely little kind of, you know, special times together.
Food memories. Buttermilk and Ireland. I've scribbled next to your final food moment, the buttermilk panna cotta. There's something very Irish about buttermilk, isn't there?
So there's lots of documentation about, in particular, English people coming to Ireland and being bamboozled with our obsession with all dairy products. So we actually we had a thing called like white foods, and it was all based on kind of fresh curds and things like that. And we drank buttermilk like the way lots of other cultures do, like lassi and kefir. Like they're a version of what our buttermilk was. That we had it every day, and it was very nutritious and it was sharp, so it was refreshing, but really good bacteria. So I think it's a wonderful ingredient that we kind of moved away from a lot of celebrating. But the buttermilk in Ireland is quite different to the buttermilk in England. Buttermilk in Ireland is more liquidy, like a lassi, and then buttermilk in England I notice is a little bit more yogurty, more thick. I mean, they're both delicious. I love both of them, but yeah, I add them into everything: marinades, breads, desserts, you name it, you can put buttermilk in.
And of course it is a great probiotic. I mean, you wouldn't have called it that in the old days, but your granny would have said it's good for your gut, wouldn't she? I
think my grandmothers would have just seen that as a useful ingredient that, yes, was good for you, but they wouldn't have, they wouldn't have seen it as like a lesson. It's kind of a lot of the stuff that would have been considered before was seen as cop on. It was seen as just normal. But when people found something new, like a good example would be like lovage in Ireland was a huge herb used everywhere, like everywhere in Ireland. And then celery was introduced, and we saw, because they've slightly similar flavours, we saw celery as a sophisticated lovage. That lovage was too kind of rustic. And as a result, we stopped using lovage. So our ancestors would have used it in everything. In fact, before MSG, lovage was used in stock cubes all over the world. And it's kind of like something that would have been cop on, or everybody knows that. It takes one generation to forget, and then, we have to rediscover it again. And buttermilk is one of those things.
So do you think Henry and Oisin are going to be scribbling in their copies of the recipe books? Presumably they're going to have one each. What are they going to say about Ireland?
Oh, I don't know. I really don't know. And I worry about things like this all the time as a parent. You think you have all the answers. You feel like you've got all the answers, but they've got their own journey and their own life. And will they love food? Will they, be interested in the history of Ireland? I don't know. And all I can do is give them the opportunity and be open to have a discussion, but not to enforce it so aggressively. Like when I was younger, I remember coming home from a history class lesson and banging my chest about history in Ireland, and my father sitting me down and going, he was very against nationalism, which of course we all know is a very dangerous thing. If people are too nationalistic, it can have worrying effects. And he went through this and about like some things that you're celebrating have got a much darker part to it. And I was like, and I would talk about Irish this and Irish that, and I don't know what was in my blood. And my father was like, no. My dad was very pro, like he loved everything French and Spanish. And then what did I grow up? But not exactly following that path that he thought I would. But I was allowed to become the woman I wanted to become. And that's good parenting. You give guidelines and you give opportunity, but essentially, however your children want to be, as long as they're being good people, that's what they'll become. So I want Oisin to, he's growing up in London. He has an English father, and I want him to know his Irish roots, but he will get to choose how he identifies himself and who he is in the long run.
Thanks for listening. Head over to Extra Bites on my Substack for more of Anna Haugh, and I'll see you next week.